My story went viral after a family celebration meant to honor our history turned into a public humiliation, where my sister clapped as our dad slapped me in front of 60 people and then demanded my cabin because I'm childless. But everything changed after I made one silent call. My name is Julia. My sister applauded after our father smacked me in front of 60 people at a family gathering intended to honor our history. She smiled as he said, "Give us the house, you've got no kids." "And my mother?" she asked, laughing before calling me a barren waste. They spoke about it nonchalantly as if they had been rehearsing it all their lives. However, that wasn't the worst part. The saddest part was learning that this wasn't their first attempt to erase me. It was just the first time they said it out loud, so I made a silent call. Just one. Everything they had constructed began to disintegrate. But here's the deal. What kind of family prepares your humiliation as a surprise toast? And what would you do if they demanded everything you constructed because you didn't have children to justify it? The email arrived as I was mopping the floor, after Finn, my old Shepherd Lab mix, knocked over his water bowl again. My cell phone rang. Kaylin family celebration is a tribute to 10 years of togetherness. This was the subject line. There was no "Hi Julia, dear family member," or anything personal. Simply Vanessa and Travis's blocky email signature at the but. It read like a mass mailer from a real estate company advertising a barbecue and selling a listing. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I did something I hadn't done in months. I called my sister. She picked up on the second ring, her voice chirpy as if she were about to laugh. "Sid, how are you? I was just thinking about you." "Hey," I said slowly. "I got your invitation. It didn't have my name on it." Was that just she cut me off, as if I was making a big deal about nothing? Totally a printing thing. You know how those invites can be glitchy. Don't overthink it, okay? She blew past my silence. "It's just going to be a casual backyard thing. Some food, a few speeches, family love and all that." Family love, correct. I didn't say much more. I hung up after exchanging a few pleasantries. I could have said no. I should have said no, but something in me, a need to hope that things could be different, kept me saying yes. I packed the car and departed. In the back seat was a wrapped gift containing a photo collage I had spent 2 nights creating. It included images from years ago, Vanessa's children as toddlers, our parents when they still looked strong, and even a photo of me and Vanessa from high school beaming as if we hadn't yet learned to loathe each other. A hand-sewn cushion sat next to it. My mother made it when her hands could still work the needle precisely. It had been sitting in my guest room for years, waiting for someone to notice. Finn leaped into the passenger seat like he always did and headed out the window halfway through the trip. It helped me breathe, knowing that someone still knew that existed. The party was hosted in Vanessa's house in a Charlotte suburb, and everything appeared to have come from the same catalog. Manicured lawns, houses painted various shades of beige. The type of neighborhood where HOA regulations are displayed like gospel. By the time I arrived, there were perhaps 30 cars lined up outside. I parked down the block and strolled up the sidewalk, holding the box in my arms and nodding to some unfamiliar neighbors. They didn't reciprocate the nod. The garden was decorated with white tents and string lights, as well as tables with mason jar centerpieces and printed napkins. A banner above the grill read, "Celebrating the Kaylin legacy, 10 years of growth." I wasn't sure what had grown, but it certainly didn't involve me. A young woman at the welcome table whom I didn't know handed me a badge. "Hi, guest number 18. Here you go." I blinked. "I'm Julia, Vanessa's sister." "Oh," she responded hesitantly. "Sorry, we just went by the list she gave us." Of course they did, I thought. I put the badge in my purse and walked in. Conversations whirled around me. Familiar voices discussed soccer leagues, school awards, and new kitchen upgrades. Nobody looked up. Nobody said my name. The photo wall was tough to overlook, 10 feet wide, surrounded by fairy lights. Kaylin family memories. It read. There were dozens of photos from Vanessa's wedding, her children's birthdays, Dad fishing with Travis, and Mom celebrating Thanksgiving with a pie I cooked. Except I wasn't in any of them. Not one. I stood there for longer than I should have, allowing my eyes to hunt for even a speck of my own existence. It was not there. I might as well not have been born. Someone behind me asked quietly, "Is she Vanessa's cousin?" I turned and grinned. "No, just her sister." "You must be." They gave an uneasy laugh and turned away. I went to the present table and sat down. My box, a teenage male, possibly a neighbor's child, swept past and slid it beneath the table, out of sight just like that. I noticed my mother near the beverages and approached her. "Hi, Mom." She eyed me up and down. "You made it," she remarked. Her voice clipped. Her eyes surveyed the room almost instantly as if she needed to redirect her focus to someone more important. Dad joined her and nodded to me. No hug, no warmth. "Nice to see you both," I said. Dad nodded again and reached for a Coke. By the time dinner arrived, I was sitting at a folding table behind the speaker stand next to the portable toilet. No one mentioned my name throughout the talks. Nobody unwrapped the gift. Nobody inquired how I was, what I was doing, or if I was all right. I smiled through every coarse toast and phony chuckle. but something inside me began to twist. The sun had set when Vanessa tapped her wineglass, the gentle chime cutting through the din of discussion like a sword. I was seated at a folding table shoved awkwardly against the tent's far side, virtually in the shadows. No one seemed to notice. A portable restroom was located just feet from my chair. The irony didn't escape me. As I adjusted in my seat, a young woman in a lilac outfit approached me, most likely recruited by Vanessa for the event, holding a plastic badge. "Here you go," she replied, presenting it to me with a big empty smile. I looked down. The tag said 37. I flipped it over once, or twice, wondering whether there was a mistake. Others around me had badges identifying their roles, including Aunt Susan, Uncle Mark, and the Kalin matriarch, labels that meant something. Identities. Mine felt like a placeholder, a number, an indication that I didn't belong. I slipped the badge inside my purse without comment. There was no use in making a big deal over something so little when the message was already obvious across the yard. I noticed Rachel Lee. We hadn't seen one another in years, not since she graduated from high school and moved to California, while I stayed behind to keep our family together. She caught my eye and tilted her head as if to say, "You good?" I gave her a little nod, non-committal yet thankful. Then Vanessa stood. She appeared radiant. I'll admit she did well in crowds. Her voice flowed naturally, refined by years of socializing and performing. "Thank you all for coming to celebrate the Kalin family legacy," she said, grinning like she was throwing a charity banquet rather than a backyard meal. She began a well-rehearsed eulogy to our parents, her husband Travis, and their children. She discussed tradition, sacrifice, and building for the future. I knew she'd use language like carry the torch or make our ancestors proud. It was her favorite type of language, high vacuous and calculating. She then cast a peek in my direction. "There's one more thing we've been meaning to ask. Julia, could you stand with us for a moment?" I paused for a brief moment, my palm clenching on the stem of my water glass. Every pair of eyes turned to mine. The clinking of silverware ceased. Even the children stopped fidgeting. I rose slowly, my legs heavier than they should have been, and headed to the center. My heart pounded in my ears. Vanessa beamed at a grin that usually indicated that something was on its way. "As you all know, Travis and I are doing everything we can to create lasting memories for our children. We've been saving, dreaming, trying to give them the best childhood possible. And well, Julia has a beautiful cabin up in the mountains." She turned to face the throng, her tone altering to a sugary earnestness that she rarely used. I opened my mouth, unsure what I was going to say, but Vanessa intervened immediately. "We think it would be such a wonderful gesture, such a family-first thing if she let us use the cabin. You know, made it part of the Kalin legacy." There it was. The muttering began immediately. Gasps and a few supporting claps. Someone said, "That's generous," as if I had already agreed. I looked at my parents. My mother wore the same fixed smile she normally kept for formal occasions. My father gave a faint nod of approval. They were not surprised. They were complicit. My mother then said loud enough for everyone to hear, "It's not like you need it. You don't have a family." It didn't come with malice. That was the worst part. It was stated as fact. Something within me split. "No," I responded clearly and unequivocally. Silence swept through the backyard. Everyone's gaze fell on me again, this time with a mix of uncertainty and uneasiness. Vanessa blinked. My father frowned. My mom's smile twitched. "It's not yours," I responded, gazing straight at Vanessa. "And it never will be." The stillness was tangible. For a little moment, even the birds stopped chirping. Vanessa then turned her back on me, indicating to the audience as if nothing had happened. Applause erupted again, but that wasn't for me. It was for her, for the concept of family togetherness. For the woman who had recently attempted to publicly deprive me of my dignity and possessions. I didn't utter another word. I didn't cry. I turned and returned to my table, my purse still clutching the nameless badge and my gift unopened beneath the drink station. I didn't touch my plate again. I waited until dessert was served and then quietly excused myself. Nobody stopped me. Nobody asked if I was okay. By the time I got to my car, my hands were trembling, not from despair or wrath, but from clarity. Something inside me had cracked, but not in the way they had anticipated. It was not a breakdown, it was a decision. Vanessa didn't flinch when I said no. She simply tilted her chin and narrowed her eyes as if she were trying to figure out why I dared to step out of position. The smile she'd worn seconds before vanished, replaced by a stern line that mirrored the growing tension about the tent. The air became dense. Conversations faded into quiet. Everyone held their wine glasses. Some looked at each other, unsure what to do now that someone had broken the script. I stood there straight, not daring to retreat, but not intending to gratify them either. Then I heard Dad's boots on the wooden deck behind me, consistent, hefty. Each step served as a warning beat. "You've always been ungrateful," he said under his breath. Before I could understand the words or even brace for impact, his hand cracked across my face, cutting the moment in half. I staggered to the side, but didn't fall. I blinked hard. My cheek ached, and my flesh was hot from the sting of his palm. My ear rang, but it wasn't the pain that startled me. That was the sound that followed. Applause. It began with Vanessa, one slow, deliberate clap, as if she were cueing the audience. Then another person joined, and another within seconds. The backyard was alive with polite, restrained clapping. Not the kind you hear at a concert, but at a PTA meeting when someone announces a policy that only benefits a select few. Cautious, social, complicit. I gazed out at the sea of familiar faces, cousins, neighbors, family, and friends. None of them moved to help. Nobody gasped in horror. No one approached me. I pressed my palm to my cheek, not to console myself, but to solidify the moment. Off to the side, I noticed Evan lift his phone and begin recording. Vanessa smiled, her arms crossed gently, as if she had just witnessed an especially well-executed speech. She had it coming. I overheard someone saying near the dessert table. Then Mum stepped forward, coiffed with her freshly curled hair and floral dress that resembled the cover of a church bulletin. Her voice sounded louder than I expected. "That's why you'll die alone," she explained. "You're just a barren waste." I stared at her, not because I didn't believe her words, but because she didn't blink when she said them. It was frigid, not theatrical, not even angry. It was simply true in her mind. I didn't speak. I didn't cry. I didn't even blink. I simply looked at her and let the sentence hang in the air like smoke from a house fire. There was nothing more to say to them, nothing to be heard. Even if I spelled it out letter for letter, they wouldn't admit anything. I turned and walked away. Nobody followed. Rachel Lee seemed to want to. She took a step towards me, but Vanessa shot her a look, a silent reminder that her place was on the side of the clapping. I kept walking past the tables, past the tent, poles, past the woman at the badge table who avoided my eyes. By the time I reached the gravel path leading to my car, my face was still burning, but it wasn't from the slap anymore. I opened the door, slid into the driver's seat, and sat there, with both hands gripping the steering wheel. My chest was tight, not with panic, not even with rage, but with something colder, sharper. I whispered to myself, "Burn this in your memory." I glanced once in the rearview mirror. My reflection looked not shocked, not devastated, just done. Finn was in the back seat, already curled up, sensing my shift in energy. I reached for my phone, the contact list popping up with muscle memory. My thumb hovered for a moment. Then I tapped Megan Wolfe. She picked up after 2 rings. "Julia, are you okay?" "I need to talk," I said, my voice flat but firm. "About what?" "Legal options I have for protecting my property and myself." She didn't hesitate. "I'm here, whatever you need." I ended the call a few minutes later with a list of action steps and a plan forming in my head like bricks clicking into place. No screaming, no storming back into the party, no pleas for understanding. They had written their own story tonight. My job now was to change the ending. The miles between Charlotte and Asheville rolled by in a blur. I didn't play music, didn't crack a window, just drove, hand steady, eyes fixed. The trees lining the interstate blurred into a muted green wall. The late evening sun cast long shadows across the road like reminders of what I was leaving behind. By the time I pulled into my driveway, the cabin lights were dim, soft, familiar. Finn stirred in the back seat, but didn't bark. He knew this. Energy. Knew when my silence meant I needed space, not sympathy. I stepped out, the gravel crunching beneath my shoes. The mountain air was cooler here, cleaner. I breathed in deeply, though it did nothing to soften the edge that had sharpened inside me. When I opened the back door to grab the gift I'd taken to the party, the handmade photo collage, and the pillow my mother once claimed to love, I hesitated. It was still neatly wrapped, untouched. I left it in the car. Inside, I dropped my purse on the bench by the door and walked straight to the sink. I removed my earrings one by one, placed them in the small dish I always kept to the left of the faucet. The mirror above the sink reflected my face, but I didn't look up. I didn't want to see the mark, or worse, the calm. Instead, I turned on the water, rinsed my face, and let the cold soothe the swelling. My cheek throbbed with a dull ache, but the real wound wasn't physical. It was how easily it had happened, how natural it seemed to everyone else. I dried my face with a towel, then stood still in the quiet of my kitchen. No ticking clocks, no distant voices, just the hum of the refrigerator and the low rustle of Finn settling onto his blanket in the living room. Then my phone buzzed, picked it up from the counter, expecting another automated alert or maybe a spam message, but it was from Rachel Lee. I should have said something. "I apologize. What they did was wrong." I stared at the screen. The message wasn't long. No dramatic apology, just honesty. Finally, from someone. I didn't write back, not because I didn't appreciate it, but because it would have cracked something inside me that I needed to keep sealed, at least for now. For the first time since the slap, my hands weren't shaking. I sat down at the edge of the couch, Finn lifting his head slightly before resting it back on his paws. My gaze drifted toward the window out into the woods behind the cabin. I remembered building this place. Every decision, from the layout to the fixtures, was mine. No one helped. Nobody asked to. It was my escape when their daughter became too heavy to carry. They never asked how I bought it. Mom never thanked me for the checks I mailed during the pandemic while her prescriptions were delayed. Vanessa never acknowledged that the car she drove was co-signed by me. That's the thing with people like them. They never forget what they've done for you, but anything you do for them is conveniently erased. I thought about my childhood. Vanessa broke her wrist while falling from the swing, and I spent the night with her in the hospital despite the lack of attention. I remembered the birthdays I spent alone while she was away at cheerleading camps, and the years I stayed at the store to assist Dad when Vanessa flew off to her next adventure. All of this felt distant, less painful, and more instructive. I whispered to the air, "They've never seen me angry. That is their mistake." With that, I stood up and approached my desk. The laptop came to life. I entered my password, opened my files, and went to a folder I hadn't looked at in over a year. Family finance, personal records. There were numerous PDFs, bank statements, scanned receipts, and Venmo screenshots. Every loan Vanessa asked me for a favor once, and it was all neatly filed, dated, and documented. I opened one labeled cabin transfer agreement draft, which Vanessa had asked me to review and suggested I give the cabin in writing for tax efficiency. I never signed it. However, her name was typed in bold in the recipient line. That alone made my stomach turn. Another file, Diane Medical Fund for 2020. It showed a transfer from my account for more than $6,000 when my insurance had expired. Dad said he would reimburse me. He never did, and he never mentioned that he later opened another account in Mom's name, which now appeared suspicious rather than helpful as her memory faded. I sat back and stared at the screen before reaching for my phone again. Megan responded quickly. "Hey, how are you holding up? I think my mother's name is being used on the accounts she doesn't understand. I want to find out how deep it goes." There was a pause. Then she asked, "Do you have proof?" "I have more than that," I explained. "I have patents." She exhaled slowly. "Okay, then it's time we start a trail. I'll walk you through how to document this for legal review." As we talked, I took notes, flagged files, and started a master document. This was not about vengeance, not really. It was about defending the truth against a lifetime of well-practiced deceptions. I didn't need to scream. I didn't need to throw anything or give a performative monologue online. I just needed proof, and I had more of it than they could possibly imagine. By the next morning, the sting in my cheek had subsided, but the clarity remained razor-sharp. The fog that usually obscured my instincts after family events, second-guessing, guilt, and shame was gone. All that remained was stillness and a clear sense of purpose. After my first cup of coffee and feeding Finn, I sat down at my desk and reopened my laptop. My plan was not to attack, it was to uncover, then protect. I watched the video clips from the party that guests had quietly recorded and sent to me later. Vanessa gave a casual tour of the backyard's Kaylin legacy table, which piqued my interest more than the others. There it was, my mother's old embroidered table runner. I hadn't seen it for years. It was unmistakable. My initials were stitched in green thread at one end of the cream linen with delicate vine stitching in the corners. Mom hand-sewed it when I was 17. It was small and discreet. Vanessa beamed at the camera. "This is one of Mom's gifts to us. She wanted the kids to have something of hers to pass down." I paused the video. My throat tightened, not from sadness, but from a sense of theft that I hadn't anticipated. That was my runner. Mom made it for me. I recall the afternoon she handed it to me saying, "You'll have your own place one day, and you'll want something familiar." She had intended it, or maybe she just forgot. I took a screenshot of Vanessa holding the cloth, labeled it symbolic, theft, and saved it in a new folder called Kaylin Active Evidence. Megan called later that morning to provide an update. "You were right," she replied. "There's a credit line opened in your mother's name. $15,000, opened last year, co-signed electronically." My stomach sank. She wouldn't even know how to open her email anymore. "That's what makes it problematic," Megan said. "If she doesn't have the cognitive capacity and someone's using her identity, we're looking at potential elder financial abuse." I pressed the phone closer to my ear. It was Vanessa and my father, wasn't it? The co-signing IP address traces back to Richard's home Wi-Fi. "We're still confirming more details." "Document everything," I told her, already opening a spreadsheet. "To record the information, I want every transaction connected to that account, every name, every dollar. I'll have our forensic CPA looped in by the end of day," she informed us. After we hung up, I sat for a long time, staring out the window, Finn's tail thumping gently as he rested nearby. I wasn't as angry as I expected to be. Not shouting, not broken. I felt surgically cold, but precise, focused. By mid, I had written and revised the same email 3 times. Eventually, I opted for simplicity. I sent it to Vanessa and Richard. The subject line read, "Enough. The body you used her name, you repurposed her memories. You humiliated me in front of people whom I once considered family. If you continue, I will use everything I have. And no, this is your final warning." No response, no call, not even vague apologies. A few hours later, Vanessa shared an Instagram photo of herself and Travis laughing on a porch swing. The caption read, "Some people believe that family owes them something. They do not." I stared at the screen. She wasn't even being subtle. They never were. I didn't respond. Instead, I printed every file I had, including the bank statements, digital receipts, and video screenshots. I placed them in a hard copy binder and kept it in a locked drawer. I also stored everything on an encrypted cloud drive. Megan had warned me not to let one copy be the only one. That evening, just before dusk, I took Finn for a walk around the perimeter of the property. The air was crisp, the mountain quiet, interrupted only by the rustle of small animals and the creaking of old trees in the wind. I paused at the trail's edge leading to the cabin's back clearing, looked out at the horizon, and whispered something I hadn't said aloud in years. If they crossed this line, I won't hold back anymore. It was not a threat. It was a promise. It happened before I had poured my second cup of coffee. I was still in my robe with Finn nosing around the kitchen when my phone's voicemail icon flashed. I pressed play with a strange sense of calm, almost as if I already knew. "Hi, this is Michelle, from Carolina First Bank. We received a property transfer form regarding the cabin at Blue Laurel Ridge submitted on your behalf yesterday. We just need your verbal confirmation before we finalize the ownership change to Vanessa Kalin." My thumb hovered over the delete button. Instead, I chose save. Within an hour I was dressed, papers in hand, and ready to go into town. Finn rode with me. He always did this when I needed steel in my spine. I walked into the bank, cool mountain air clinging to my skin, leash in one hand and manila folder in the other. I didn't ask to speak with Michelle. I asked for the branch manager. The lobby smelled faintly of pine-scented cleaner and institutional coffee. A receptionist greeted me with a professional smile. 5 minutes later, I was seated across from a middle-aged man in a navy tie who appeared unprepared for the type of conversation I was about to initiate. "There's been an attempt to change ownership of my property," I explained, unfolding the paperwork. "It was not authorized. Here is the original deed, my name, and my signature alone." He cleared his throat. "It says here, the request included a letter of family agreement." "Forged," I said, holding up a copy of my signature next to the one on the submitted form. "I'll compare them," he stated. His expression remained unchanged, but his fingers twitched. "We'll freeze this request immediately," he replied, "and flag the account for any future alterations." "Thank you," I responded, standing, "and please record this internally. This will not be the last time her name appears on your desk." By early afternoon, I was back at home, sitting in front of my laptop. The folder I had previously buried under layers of digital clutter, titled Family Debt, Do Not Touch, was now front and center. I opened it as if I were opening a vault. The files dated back a decade. Every time Vanessa borrowed money, every emergency bill I paid, and every favor I did, I never asked for repayment, but never forgot it was there. Itemized with screenshots, bank transfers, text confirmations, receipts for co-signed loans, and notes from when I paid Mom's hospital bills in 2020. Quietly, because it wasn't the appropriate time to discuss money, I made a new Excel file. It was called Kalin Family. There was only one column: date, next, amount, next, recipient, then description, then notes. Emotionally restrained but honest. $12,000 is marked as private down payment assistance. Confidential. That one stood out in my mind. Vanessa begged me not to tell Travis that she couldn't afford the closing cost for their new home. I spent the next hour retrieving documents from emails, online banking, and even old voicemails. It wasn't only about the money. It was about the pattern, behavior, and entitlement that had spread through my family like rot beneath polished wood. When I finished the spreadsheet, I saved it 3 times, on a local hard drive, in an encrypted cloud, and on a flash drive stored in a fireproof box. Then I began making calls. The IRS agent on the phone was polite and attentive. I didn't exaggerate. I simply told them what I had discovered: suspicious income transfers, a lack of repayment, and informal family loans that had never been declared as gifts. Then came Adult Protective Services. I explained Mom's cognitive decline, the account opened in her name, and the financial activity that began around the time her memory deteriorated. Then I called the credit bureau and requested that both my and my mother's accounts be monitored for identity theft. I was not shaking, I was not angry, I was efficient, precise. By the time the sun began to set behind the ridge, I had photographed everything. My hands were tired and my eyes were dry, but my mind was clearer than it had been in years. That evening, Vanessa texted me, "You're overreacting." I stared at it for a few seconds before responding with a single image comparing the forged property transfer to my actual signature. No words, just the truth. Then Richard called. His voice had the same sharp edge I remembered from childhood, which he used when I dared to speak back. "You're destroying this family, Julia." I took a deep breath and responded flatly. "You did that when you hit me in front of 60 people and applauded the lie." There was silence on the line. Then he hung up. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel guilty either. I felt certain they had drawn a line, and now I was holding the pen. Kitchen the next morning. Sunlight crept through the trees and landed directly across my table where last night's coffee mug sat next to my open laptop. Finn stretched near my feet. his ears twitching from the bird chatter outside, but I remained frozen in my chair, rereading Megan's email sent shortly after midnight. A cease and desist letter was filed, and a rebuttal was submitted. I also sent the deed history and tax records to their legal representative for clarification. The silence in my home contrasted sharply with what was going on outside. Vanessa had posted again, this time, a polished photo of her and Travis standing in front of a fake fireplace, arms wrapped around their children. The caption reads, "Family money should be reserved for those who leave legacies, not for those who disappear into the woods with dogs." I stared at the screen without expression. If they wanted to play with fire, I had enough dry brush to start. A forest fire. I didn't respond. No cryptic subtweets. There would be no vague moral jabs. Instead, I opened my email and wrote to Megan, "Let them keep talking. We have the truth and the law." An hour later, I got a packet in the mail. No signature. There's no return address. Just a white envelope with a printed letter from Vanessa and Richard's attorney. They accused me of holding the cabin in trust for the family, that it had always been viewed as a shared asset rather than a personal one, that I had only managed it temporarily until the family required it for legacy purposes. And now they demanded that I formally transfer it to Vanessa. It took everything I had not to laugh. Instead, I scanned and sent the document to Megan. She replied almost immediately, "We recommend that your client review actual property deeds before making baseless claims." I leaned back and exhaled slowly. These weren't emotional outbursts anymore. These were tactics that had been measured and practiced. They were attempting to use public relations to force a legal decision. I checked the cabin's exterior cameras. I installed them myself following a break-and scare in the winter. Nothing elaborate, just enough to see the driveway and porch. The video history loaded smoothly, and I looked at the timestamps. Vanessa and Evan were both present, unannounced, uninvited. He arrived in his black SUV. Evan carried a briefcase. Vanessa wore the dress she had saved for Sunday brunches she would never pay for. They walked around the porch, peering through the windows, and my breath caught. They opened the door with a key. I paused the feed, leaned forward, and scrolled through the footage. They stood in the kitchen next to a man dressed in a gray blazer and carrying a small suitcase. He opened it. Notary stamp. I zoomed in. Evan put documents on the counter. Vanessa pointed, stamped one of the pages. Vanessa signed, been signed. Then they left. No call. There was no advance notice. There was no legal right. I downloaded the footage, backed it up, and sent it to Megan with a note that they had trespassed and forged legal signatures with a notary present. It's time to make this public. She didn't need to be told twice. The video was shared with the State Bar Association, the Secretary of State's office, and a trusted reporter from a local affiliate. It began to unravel. My inbox was filled with messages, some hateful, some apologetic, and a few anonymous. One person said, "You should be ashamed. You're ruining your parents' lives." I read it 3 times. Then, for the first time, I posted this publicly. Abuse does not cease to exist simply because it takes place behind smiles and casseroles. Silence is not love. It's complicated. The post caught fire. People started to comment. Strangers, friends, even former classmates. Others shared their own experiences with inheritance manipulation, forced family property transfers, and gaslighting disguised as tradition. The hashtag Kaylin Cabin conspiracy began trending. Vanessa's influencer partnerships gradually faded. One brand made an announcement. "We have put our relationship with Mrs. Kaylin on hold while we seek legal clarification." That night, I went for another walk with Finn. The sky was deep indigo, and the wind moved through the trees as if it knew everything. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt clean, as if a wound had been cut open and finally allowed to bleed. They attempted to take my home. I took back the truth. Now it was time to face the consequences. When the video arrived in Lily Rose's inbox, I was outside clipping dead branches off the blueberry bushes near the shed. My phone vibrated against the porch rail every few minutes, but I ignored it. I'd accomplished my goal of exposing the truth, and now I was letting gravity take care of the rest. Lily had messaged me once quietly after the party. I didn't clap. She had written, "I just froze. I apologize." I hadn't responded then. I didn't need an apology. I required action. Apparently she understood as well. The clip she posted to Reddit was 27 seconds long, just enough to capture the sound of the slap. My stunned expression, Vanessa's hands coming together in slow, deliberate applause, and then the crowd. Some laughed, some people nodded, nobody intervened. Her caption was direct. It was a family reunion. This was how they treated their youngest daughter. It didn't take long. The video received over 300,000 views. It surpassed 1 million. Bearing waste began to trend across platforms, both ridiculously and outrageously. People shared it with reactions ranging from disgust to disbelief. Talk shows began calling commentators, dissected each frame. What type of family believes this is normal? I didn't speak with the press. I didn't give interviews. I didn't even tweet. I let the story stand on its own without embellishments. That was the part they didn't understand. Truth doesn't require spin. It only needs oxygen. Megan called with her usual calmness. The state attorney general's office has opened an investigation into Diane's financial accounts. The forensic team discovered several authorizations signed following her dementia diagnosis. The IRS is halting Vanessa's refund processing. Richard, that has been subpoenaed. She paused. A court hearing is scheduled. I nodded slowly, but she couldn't see me. CPS also conducted a wellness check at Vanessa's home. Apparently, the property had already been flagged last year. It's now part of a larger file, and Evans' 2 brand contracts were terminated. One-sided violation of moral conduct clauses. I leaned back in the chair near the cabin window, the tea cooling beside me. Finn lay stretched out on the rug, his ears twitching as I exhaled. The wind through the pines sounded like waves, quiet but relentless. Vanessa attempted to reclaim the narrative. She went live on her platform while sitting cross-legged in her tastefully decorated living room. She's always been jealous, Vanessa said into the camera, her voice soft but quivering. We were just trying to honor our family's legacy, but some people twist everything. I watched it from beginning to end. The comment section quickly lit up, not with sympathy but with screenshots of tax forms, property deeds, and bank transfers from years ago that had somehow made their way online. Someone who had access to the truth had anonymously uploaded it. Someone had my back. Someone had seen enough. Public opinion turned against her in real time. Your sister helped you get out of foreclosure. She paid your mother's bills. You applauded when your father hit her. I sipped my tea and watched it all unfold. I didn't delete the hateful comments either, which called me selfish, dramatic, and bitter. Let them stay. Let them demonstrate that not everyone understands boundaries. Let the light shine on the roaches. I received an envelope from the county clerk's office. Inside was a formal request. Would I be the legal guardian of Diane Kalin? I stared at it for a long time, but not because I was torn. I was not. I picked up the pen and wrote, I'm not her guardian, I am her daughter. And that wasn't enough. For her, I signed my name, folded the form, and mailed it the same day. The court placed her in the custody of a state-appointed facility 2 counties away. As next of kin, I received regular updates. However, I didn't make a visit. I was not cruel. I simply chose to stop bleeding for those who would have left me to die of thirst. I walked along the edge of my property, Finn trotting beside me. The dew had lifted. The air smelled like pine and soil. The sky, clear and uninterrupted, stretched infinitely above us. I stood at the top of the ridge behind the cabin, allowing the wind to wash over me without regard for symbolism or healing metaphor, simply because it felt clean, honest, and for once in my life, the silence was not lonely. It was earned. It had been several weeks since the last email, phone call, or legal letter. At that point, the chaos had transformed into something unfamiliar. Quiet. The kind of quiet that doesn't throb or press, but spreads out like a thick blanket after a long, harsh storm. I spent my mornings walking along the property's edge. The trees hadn't changed, but I did the same gravel pathways, the same rocking chair on the porch. However, something in the way I moved through them had changed. I no longer checked my phone mid-step or anticipated which name would appear on the screen. Richard had become silent. Vanessa's social media accounts had been either deleted or suspended. I hadn't checked because I wasn't interested in knowing. Diane's recipe requests and photo dumps of her grandchildren had slowed down the family. Group chat, nobody sent anything anymore. The last message was a generic Happy Father's Day from a cousin who had no idea or chose not to know what had happened beneath the Kalin name. There was no triumph in the silence. There was no celebration. Just the realization that I had finally stopped pretending. The documents confirming the cabin's sole ownership arrived. Thick envelope, official seal, notarized, indexed, final. I slowly opened it, brushing the gold embossed lettering as if it would vanish. It did not. It was real. The house was still mine. No more threats. There are no more gray areas. Megan texted a simple, "It's done." The IRS had completed its audit. Vanessa was flagged for unreported gifts. Richard had been cited for improper account use involving Diane's medical funds. The fine alone could have paid for my entire mortgage. Diane had been assigned to a long-term care facility in Winston-Salem, a quiet, state-funded facility that isn't glamorous but runs smoothly. I was invited to visit or at least sign her intake paperwork in person. I agreed to drive down. I didn't go inside. I parked in the visitor's lot and watched a nurse wheel an elderly woman through the garden paths. It was not Mom, but it could have been. Instead, I approached the front desk and handed over a small parcel. Inside was the embroidered cloth that Vanessa had claimed at the party, which my mother had sewn with my initials years before. I'd included a note. It was always yours and mine. The receptionist accepted it without question, most likely because she was used to such situations. Offerings from daughters who loved but were unable to return. I returned home that evening and stood in the kitchen as the kettle began to hum. I poured 2 cups of tea, one for myself and one for whoever I was becoming. Finn trotted over to sit beside me as he always did, patient, ever knowing. His eyes met mine, and I swear he felt it too, something deeper than relief, something closer to reclamation. 3 women arrived at the cabin. Their names were Karen, Beth, and Marissa. They were members of a local support group with which I had begun volunteering, helping women rebuild after being quietly erased by their own people, widows, daughters, mothers who had been forced out of the homes they had helped build. We spent our weekend hiking, baking, crying, and laughing. They didn't inquire about my story directly, but they knew, and I knew that marked the beginning of something new. It's not a program or a non-profit. It's just a space, a community for women like me, people who had been invisible until they decided not to be. I didn't make it public. I didn't advertise. I didn't post any photos. It was invitation only. And every woman who walked up my porch steps knew she was finally safe on in the evenings. After the guests had gone to bed, I sat on the deck, a blanket over my lap, and a journal in hand. I didn't destroy them, I wrote one night. I simply stopped protecting their version of the truth. There was no bitterness left in the ink, only a clean line beneath a lengthy sentence. When I closed the journal and returned inside, the cabin smelled of cinnamon and cedar. Finn was curled up beside the fireplace, his breathing soft and steady. I sank into the armchair by the window, the firelight dancing across the wooden beams above. Outside, the wind blew gently across the ridge, brushing against the trees like a lullaby. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't looking for peace. I'd taken it. Sometimes the loudest strength is found in a quiet refusal to be erased, used, or to continue pretending that blood alone makes someone a family member. This story is not just about vengeance. It's about reclaiming your voice when others try to silence it, as well as understanding that forgiveness does not always bring peace. Sometimes it comes from simply walking away. What would you do if your family crossed that line? If you enjoyed this story or found it thought-provoking, please like, comment, and subscribe. More authentic, raw, and powerful family stories are on their way.